Okay, your second Plato question, which is question 5 for the exam, reads, Plato, through his discussion of the constitution of the soul, draws a distinction between the effects of an erotic relationship and those of platonic love. Introduce the description of the constitution of the soul offered by Plato, and discuss the effects of each of the sorts of relationship discussed in the Phaedrus, that is, non-love, erotic love, and platonic love. Here you should keep in mind that Plato's really fond of his threes. The discussion of the constitution of the soul happens. Let me see, I want to say it's page 31. Hey, score one for memory. Okay, this is right after he gives you that weird, bad argument for the immortality of the soul. Right by 246a, basically his treatment of this starts. That then is enough about the soul's immortality. Here is what we must say about its structure, its constitution. Right? To describe what the soul actually is would require a very long account, altogether a task for God in every way, but to say what it's like is humanly possible and takes less time. So let us do the second in our speech. So basically what Plato is going to do is give you a metaphor to tell you what sort of thing the soul is sort of like, or rather than treat philosophically the precise nature of the soul. So, what Plato does is likens the soul to what he calls here the natural union of a team of winged horses and their charioteer. The gods have horses and charioteers that are themselves all good and come from good stock, while everyone else has a mixture. So, to begin with, our driver is in charge of a pair of horses. Second, one of his horses is beautiful and good and from the stock of the same sort, while the other is the opposite and has the opposite sort of bloodline. This means chariot driving, in our case, is inevitably a painfully difficult business. So, what the heck is he getting at here? Well, with the constitution of the soul, basically the soul is what we call tripartite. Which is a fancy way of saying it's got three parts, right? We have a chariot driver and a team of horses, right? You know from actually having seen horses that horses are a lot bigger than people, right? Well, we have two different sized horses as well. We have one horse that is beautiful and good and from good stock. That is, it's obedient, right? And then we have another horse that is the opposite sort of horse. And then we have a chariot driver. Well, for Plato, each of these parts of the soul represent a different aspect of our human volition, a different aspect of our soul, right? So if we just think about it, what should be in control of a chariot if we're likening our soul to a chariot? Well, reason. Right. In a lot of cases, I've seen student responses to questions about the constitution of the soul and Plato, likening this to like an angel on one side and a devil on the other, and you have to choose. Right? Well, no. For Plato, really, reason should be the driver. You're not choosing between this horse and that horse. You're telling the horses what to do and where to go. Right? Ideally, anyway. The problem for Plato is that we have these two horses, one that is beautiful and good and obedient and all that sort of thing. We call that self-control. In different translations and different texts, he calls it temperance. Right? And then we have the dark horse of desire, which is impetuous, and it wants what it wants when it wants it. Right? It doesn't listen to reason. Right? Later on in the metaphor, he talks about how, this horse, the good, the beautiful, the light horse, the one that listens to us, just listens to it's likened in the case of a chariot. This horse would listen to just verbal commands. Hey, horse, go over there, and the horse would go over there. Whereas this horse, you got to yell and you got to scream and you've got to use the whip and you've got to chide, and sometimes even then it doesn't listen. Right? So, more or less, right, what Plato has done is given an account of that earlier argument where remember in his first speech where he said that love is some sort of desire, but even people who are not in love have the desire for beautiful things. So we have two principles that lead us, right? One is called being in our right mind, and that's where judgment is led by reasons towards what's best. And the other is the desire for the immediate gratification of pleasure. Right? This is the ally of that sort of desire in the soul. Right? So this more or less is the soul. It's a tripartite thing with reason, self-control, and desire. Now, what Plato wants to claim is that the soul, even though this part is unruly and poorly trained and won't listen, right? The soul is more or less good, and it's directed towards good things. Right? Reason, through philia, note the root word of philosophy, right, which is a sort of love, is directed towards and desires wisdom or truth. Right? Self-control or temperance, through a sort of love, a spiritual sort of love that we call agape, is directed towards justice or the good. And this dark horse of desire, this impetuous horse that wants what it wants, is just poorly trained. But through Eros, which Plato, through Socrates, was pointing out is one of the Greek gods, this is why he's got to give his palinode to love, through Eros is directed towards beauty. Again, page 18. It's the unreasoning desire that overpowers a person's considered impulse to do right. This part of the soul right here, right, and is driven to take pleasure in beauty, which isn't so much a problem because beauty is one of the forms, except its force is reinforced by desire for beautiful bodies, and it takes its name from the word of force, and is called eros. Right? So more or less, what Plato is claiming is that the soul is this unequal distribution of motive forces, right? We have sorts of love that pertain to each part of the soul, and those loves, properly directed, when properly directed, are directed towards the soul's proper nourishment, which is some aspect of the perfect truth. Now, in an erotic relationship, what happens is that this dark horse of desire overpowers in the soul reason, which should be the soul steersman, and this obedient horse, the temperate or self-controlled horse, and drags the entire soul, along with the body, kicking and screaming towards what it misinterprets to be its object, the particular beautiful body. And we've already seen, when I was going over the last question on 39, sort of a description of this. Right? Of course, a man who was initiated long ago or who has become defiled is not moved abruptly from here a vision of beauty itself, which he sees, he sees what we call beauty here. So instead of gazing at the latter reverently, he surrenders to pleasure and sets out in the manner of a four-footed beast, eager to make babies and wallowing in vice. He goes after unnatural pleasure too, without a trace of fear or shame. So basically, in the erotic relationship described in the first two speeches, which is still an issue in the third, what happens is this soul, since it's so dumb and unruly, misinterprets its recollection of perfect beauty erotically and tries to discharge that eros through the body and its desires. So basically, at this point, this aspect of the soul aligns itself with the body, and the body and this aspect of the soul try to jump all over the lover and make babies. he's becoming less abashed about talking about sex by about page 39. Right? So that's what happens in the erotic relationship. In the platonic relationship, think back to his description in Socrates' first speech, the second speech that what is it? Where is it? The second speech that he gave, where he strengthened Lysias's speech. Let's see, where is it? I should know this off the top of my head. Here it is. Do you remember that argument against Eros? This kind of erotic, overpowering, maddening kind of desire, right? That these are the points you should bear in mind, my boy. You should know that the friendship of the lover arises without any goodwill at all, no like food. Its purpose is to sate hunger. So really, the beloved is the object of desire. The alignment of this desire is part of the soul with bodily desires, right, in the human being, right? So this is the problem with Eros. It tends to overpower the better angels of your nature, right, and direct you towards the gratification of physical pleasure, which has no regard for the other person. So this is why Eros tends to be jealous and spiteful and hurtful and detrimental to the beloved, etc., etc., etc. Right? This is still a potential throughout all of these speeches. That's what happens in an erotic relationship. Whereas, you'll note the footnote attached to the final statement by 241b. Do wolves love lambs? That's how lovers befriend a boy. Footnote 47 points out that do wolves love lambs refers to that for the verb for love refers to agape. That's how lovers, that's Eros, befriend from philia a boy. So, what we've got is three parts of the soul. We've got three expressions of love pertaining, each of them, to a part of the soul, and directing that soul towards an aspect of the perfect fruit of the forms, its nourishment. Right? So what Plato wants us to do is basically take a cold shower and keep our pants on when we come across a beautiful body. Right? And only in that manner, when we hold off from the immediate gratification of these physical bodily kinds of pleasure, does the soul then have a chance to engage in that process of a recollection, right? So this part of the soul, when it experiences this erotic desire, its desire for beauty as it really is, according to Plato, right? So if this desire doesn't leap off and misinterpret itself as bodily, it's given a chance to, as he points out, gaze reverently at the beloved. Right? And in that manner, self-control through agape can direct itself towards the moral qualities of the beloved as well, and reason through philia can direct it towards the intellectual qualities of the beloved. And in this manner, Platonic love is a type of love wherein harmony comes to the soul. In the erotic relationship, reason and self-control are dragged kicking and screaming along. They never get their proper nourishment, and because desire is stupid, it never really gets its proper nourishment. All it gets is a bodily gratification that brings a form of conflict to the soul. You know people that are conflicted in this manner. I want, but I shouldn't. No, I want, and they go ahead and do it anyway, and it's bad for everybody involved, right? So, right, what Plato wants to do is overcome that conflict through retraining this part of the soul and directing it towards what's properly its object. So the Platonic relationship is one where the intellectual qualities of the beloved are important, the moral qualities of the beloved are important, and what's more, it's still hot. Right? If platonic love is going to do what Plato wants it to do, that is, find expression for all three parts of the soul, platonic love must involve eros, you know? So now this leaves the last type of love that we're discussing, the non-love relationship that Lysias was so advocative of. He advocated, is the idea. All right? And Socrates strengthened his speech in order to make sort of a half-hearted argument in favor of. Largely, Socrates' second speech was a critique of Eros and its effects on the physical development of the beloved, the intellectual development of the beloved, and the possessions of the beloved. These Eros is a problem. And remember, he concluded that argument by saying that, well, let's just say that all of these nasty qualities of erotic desire that lead a person to this disadvantage, let's say that the non-love relationship has all of the opposite advantages because Eros doesn't drive us crazy. The non-love relationship for Plato is sort of like a physical form of gratification. It's friends with benefits, more or less, where Eros does not play tyrant over the entire soul. So really, all that happens in the non-love relationship is a physical form of gratification. It bypasses the soul altogether. Right? And this is why Lysias was trying to argue that this type of relationship, since it doesn't drive us crazy and drive our soul into conflict, is preferable to a relationship that involves Eros, because Eros is so mind-blowing and maddening. I believe I used the phrase an erotic hand grenade in your pants to describe it in class. So, that's what's going on in the non-love relationship. The non-love relationship is just bodily. In the non-love relationship, even somebody like Plato might advocate, okay, well, you just satisfy your bodily desires and think about mathematics. Right? Infer from particular triangles to triangularity. It's not the best recollection tool that you got, right? Because Eros, through the expression of this desirous part of the body, is its love for beauty in itself, which is the form that we can see, which drives us so mad as a result of that, but nonetheless has the potential to be the most forceful and productive recollection key that we have for these perfect truth of the forms. Right? That's what's cool about love. Right? But the purely erotic relationship misinterprets itself, it drives us crazy, and all we get in return for the erotic relationship as a result of this misinterpretation is an orgasm. Right? And the non-love relationship bypasses the soul altogether. Let's just keep our wits about us. Right? And satisfy that bodily desire. Platonic love, by Plato's argument, is the only type of love that speaks to the soul in a way that doesn't draw it into misinterpretation and conflict, but rather brings harmony. Right? All the parts of the soul are producing, or are pursuing through the requisite types of love, their proper nourishment, that which they really desire. So, all the parts of the soul get what they want. It's an ethically justifiable kind of relationship. And that's the second reason platonic love is a good sort of madness. It's still madness. But it's similar to those sorts of madness that were discussed. Right? The cathartic, the prophetic, and the poetic types of madness, which are not bad, but productive. So, let me, well, you know what? I've got all the right notes here. Your last question, where'd my question page go? Here we go. It's sadly on my page too. And it reads, Plato, with Platonic love, introduces a productive sort of love that would actually be beneficial in Socrates' second speech in the Phaedrus. What we just talked about in the last two videos, right? This one and the last one. However, Plato himself argues that this sort of love is really, really hard to achieve. What I'm getting at here is that Platonic love, as we're trying to restrain and retrain this part of our soul, which is reinforced by our bodily desires, while in potential, it can bring this kind of harmony to the soul and produce the kind of relationship where the soul gets everything it needs in the way of nourishment from the perfect truth that finds expression for each of the sorts of love. Well, this is the case. Plato's an unabashed elitist. Unabashed. Right? In the Republic, he argues that only the best shall rule, and who are the best? Philosophers. Go figure. Right? So, right, what Plato wants to claim is that most of us, when we try to train our soul, and most of us, when we try to restrain this dark horse of desire, we can try, but then guess what? We'll probably mostly, and most of us, fail. We'll fail. Why? Because look at the size of that part of the soul, right? And look at how it's reinforced by our physical desires for gratification. Right? So most of us are going to break down and give in to eros and give in to our physical desires, and guess what happens then? Look at speech 1 and 2. We're liars, we're braggarts, we're jealous, we're spiteful, we're harmful to the intellectual development of the beloved, the physical development of the beloved, and the possessions of the beloved. All of these things are problems with the attempt to achieve Platonic love, resulting in failure, which is the most likely outcome. That's the dilemma I'm setting up in this question. Right? Now, given this, I'll continue reading the question here, would a non-love relationship discussed in the first two speeches, given the overpowering tendencies of eros, be a safer alternative for most of us? That said, if we want to feed our soul, maybe we should just study mathematics, stop mucking about with, like I call it, an erotic hand grenade in our pants. We're playing with fire, we're playing with dynamite, so maybe wouldn't it be more ethically viable, justifiable, and all around safer to just do away with all of this love, pursue a non-love kind of relationship that meets our physical needs, and study math, right? Infer from triangles to triangularity. Right? Or study nature and infer from particular trees to treeness. Right? There are other ways to get at these forms. There are other ways to nourish the soul. And given the fact that we become such jerks when eros gets the better of us, isn't this ethically viable? So basically what I'm asking you to do in this question, well, the question tells you, discuss this issue critically, presenting arguments to support your position, which address all sides of the issue. Now, proponents of the non-love position, they might cite all of the domestic violence kind of statistics in American and Canadian culture, actually showing that most attacks and crimes of passion actually occur as a result of this kind of passion. Right? So, given that, it seems almost unjustifiable to advocate that most people pursue this kind of love. It's crazy. And some might argue that, well, if you don't try to achieve this kind of love, then you're not really training your soul and you're neglecting the soul's harmony. Right? But I've just said there might be another way to train the soul so that it comes into a form of harmony and perhaps one that doesn't involve jealous, spiteful, detrimental activity being perpetrated at the expense of the beloved. That might be a solid argument. Right? Now, people who want to argue in favor of platonic love might just point out that, the non-love relationship has the potential to ignite in us this form of desire, this erotic desire. It's come up a number of times when I've discussed this material with students that, fine, you can have a non-love relationship, but really the definition of this part of the soul is that it's out of control. So if you're having a non-love relationship that is only physical, that's not to say that these soulful sort of erotic desires might emerge and you're right back in the same situation. You see, it's a dilemma. It's a dilemma, right? So what I'm asking you to do is take a position, one that you really believe, and then justify your belief. And I know it's possible that some of you just don't care, right? You don't care. Non-love, erotic love, platonic love. I don't care. Well, that's not the point, right? Really what I'm asking you to do is engage, even if you don't care, right, with this issue. Pick a side and show me how well you can cut your philosophical teeth on this dilemma. Right? So I really like this question. It's a point at which you get to actually exercise your philosophical muscles. Right? So you're probably wondering how I'm going to assess these questions. Well, for the first, right, I'm asking myself, do you exhibit a knowledge of Plato's metaphysics and epistemology, and have you drawn the relevant connections, and have you presented in a clear, concise, complete, and sufficient manner? Right? These are the criteria for the first question. Second question, same sort of thing. Have you acquitted yourself to unpacking the metaphor that Plato has presented us for the soul? Right? So in terms of that, and have you provided an accurate, complete, and concise, and sufficient, clear treatment of each of the sorts of love, right? You're exhibiting understanding. This last question is a little bit different, right? I'm asking all of these clear, concise, sufficient, complete kind of questions, but I'm also evaluating the strength of your argument, right? So if you present me with strong reasons to adopt the position that you're adopting as your position in this question, right, what you've done is you've written a good argument. Right? So you're writing an argument here. That's how I'm going to assess this. How strong is your argument? And there's a whole host of argument evaluation techniques that I'm going to employ with this. So, February 7th, I'll be checking email today. So if you need anything, you can contact me today, and I'll do my best to answer your questions. I will be on campus on Friday as well. I'll have office hours, so you can get a hold of me then. I'll see you in class as well, provided the sky doesn't fall. Oh my God, look at how it's coming down out there. That's insane. I just didn't want you to have to brave these roads and actually risk, because, like I say, academics, philosophy, I think this is important stuff, but it's not more important than your safety. So be safe out there, and let me know if you need anything. Thanks. Have a good